if you want.
Yeah, roll it.
Yo, everyone, welcome back. Brand new episode of Techish in the building. Just a quick proviso, actually. This is recorded before any election, so we're not going to have any election talk. But just to let you know, this is me, Michael Payne. I'm the CEO of Pocket and Pocket Jobs, and I am joined with...
Abadesi of Hustle Crew.
Cool, let's go. So,
Let's do it.
I guess first topic is kind of inherently political. I was just really fascinated by a lot of articles and studies that have come out that show that Gen Z young men
Yes.
are leaning far more conservative than previous generations, and actually men and women of previous generations usually move in quite lockstep. So you would imagine that like the men of the 70s and the women of the 70s were much more liberal than their parents.
Yeah.
Each generation accordingly so, but this is the first gen actually where there's now a divide.
Yeah.
Where Gen Z women are becoming far more liberal and Gen Z men are going in the other direction.
Interesting.
There's been a few explanations why, but before we get into them, like, does that ring true to you? Does it make sense to you? Like, just like off the top of the dome.
It's really interesting because a few weeks ago I was at an event in London called Sex Talks by Emma Louise Boynton, which is a really good podcast. And the two guests that she was speaking to were Laura Bates, who is a gender equity activist and author of a book called Men Who Hate Women, which is all about incel culture and the rise of basically young boys and men being groomed into misogyny. And Ben Hurst, who's also like a very prolific diversity and inclusion advocate here in the UK, currently also working for a gender equity organization. And he specifically does workshops with boys and young men around attitudes towards sexism and stuff like that. And so it was a conversation that's so relevant for this question of like, why are young men turning into more conservative with a small c, going far right? And what I learned from that conversation is that a lot of young men are like lacking a kind of like official like rite of passage from like boyhood into manhood in like just society today. Like it just doesn't exist in the way that it did in history. These are points that like Ben Hurst was making. And as a consequence of that, they're kind of like seeking authority from online creators. And unfortunately, the most viral creators right now are people like Andrew Tate, who are incredibly misogynistic. I mean, this man is literally accused of multiple sexual violence crimes.
Trafficking.
And yeah, trafficking, harassment, rape, you name it. And I just find it so interesting, these algorithms. Like I've stayed at Airbnbs where it's like not logged into an account. I'm just like putting on a music video, like the most innocuous thing, Tame Impala on YouTube.
That's logged in with a different account, basically.
Literally.
The previous person. Okay,
yeah, like in an Airbnb host, or not even logged in, like just free
default
ad for YouTube. And I'll be hanging out with my homies. It goes from Tame Impala to Rihanna. 20 minutes later, I'm on Jordan Peterson.
Damn.
20 minutes later, I'm on Andrew Tate. 20 minutes later, I'm literally being groomed to be an involuntary celibate, misogynistic, whatever. And I think we need to talk about how insidious and ingrained these toxic attitudes towards women are becoming. Like, I don't believe that these creators are innocent. Like, I believe they are intentionally influencing boys and young men to have like super problematic views. And I think that's like a really big part of it.
No, absolutely. I concur with everything you said. And to me, the big change happened with the rise of TikTok. And it sounds like the most boomer thing you can say. But the reason why I say that is historically we had the social graph. So when you signed up for Facebook, it was the content you saw was based on what do your friends like or what are your friends doing. With TikTok, we went to the interest graph, which is basically I'm going to guess what I think you like based on how you respond to certain things. And then two, at the same time, it's also going to be in the most rapid short form way possible.
Yeah.
So I noticed that actually when I was creating content on TikTok, that like most of my views would be men. Basically, it would be like 90% men. And actually my experience when I created on Instagram and other platforms, that wasn't the case. It would probably be a lot more gender balanced, But what social media in the TikTok kind of world does is that it's such an instant gratification platform that if a man sees a man, he's more likely to quickly engage, maybe for a second. And if a woman sees a woman, they're more likely to quickly engage, at least for a split second, right? So then it therefore now puts everybody in these silos and buckets.
Yeah.
So now we're in these kind of almost psychographic buckets that are completely separate and devoid from each other.
Yeah.
So one, on the women's side, if you're a young girl, you're going to be seeing stuff about Roe v. Wade. You're going to be seeing stuff about the rights that have been taken away from you.
Yeah.
The guys ain't seeing that. They're seeing maybe... content where there's a handful of men, not just that, but also the handful of stories where maybe a man has been done wrong. The 1 out of 1,000 story you might see where it's like, oh, this man, he His wife divorced
lied
about him, divorced him, or the fake allegation or whatever, right? And then you're also going to get to see the most bombastic content creators like an Andrew Tate, like a Jordan Peterson. These people are charismatic, but they're demagogues. They use their charisma for the worst ends and to monetize them, to monetize their, their stupid audience. So that is one major factor.
Yeah.
The second major factor is I think those of us that are of a more liberal bent, like we are slacking in the sense that if I'm into podcasts, who are the major podcasters? It's going to be like a Joe Rogan, maybe what's his name, Hassan. He's the only major like Twitch streamer that's of a liberal bent. But if you're into any other thing, you're into martial arts, you're into football, you're into thing, eventually somewhere down the line you're going to come into contact with a content creator who's very popular, who is right wing or super right wing or super kind of misogynistic, whatever. So where we're lacking is that there's not enough people out there that are pushing a more healthy perspective on masculinity.
But this is the thing. They are out there, but the algorithm isn't driving attention to them. Like these systems are creating these monsters. Like why is it? Like YouTube knows I'm black. The amount of black content I watch when I am logged into my YouTube account, my profile photo is there, it knows I'm black. But then tell me why when I type in yoga workout 20 minutes, Pilates video 10 minutes, I'm seeing white creators.
Okay,
Do you know what I mean? Like, there is some flaw in these designs because these teams aren't representative, because they're like racist, anti-black, white supremacist, whatever labels we want to use. Something is going fundamentally wrong. Like, if that is the case, that I, as a user, want to see people that remind me of myself in the platform, like, I'm still not getting that.
Right, okay.
You see what I'm saying? Like, the platforms are still favoring dominant social groups in a way that just doesn't make sense. Like, I feel like it's assuming a lot of the user, like people like this misogynistic content, therefore like I will just push that misogynistic content out every 20 minutes in the hope that, that baits someone in. Like I feel like those creators are there, like the good intention creators, the ones who are not toxic, but they're not being promoted. And that's what I think is like incredibly problematic. The other thing that I want to say is like, if you are a parent or you have young people in your life, like this is like a really important conversation to actually start with them now. Like actually like educate them on the fact that there are bad actors on the internet who are going to lure them in with like actually very innocent videos like grooming, like literally grooming, how to shave, how to like work out, how to eat healthy. Like they don't go straight into jiu-jitsu. Beat your wife when she doesn't listen to you, or all women are gold diggers. It starts with something very innocent, like how to be productive, how to have a better sleep regimen, how to have a better gym regimen, how to have a healthy diet that promotes muscle growth. Like that is how they get people in. And like they're actually, and this is from the research Laura Bates has done, targeting boys of the age of 10 and 11, because they realize that is when you're the most vulnerable. Your body's changing. You're starting to think a little bit more about being, attractive to whatever sex, you fancy. And you are looking for guidance that you might be too shy or too ashamed to ask the people in your life. And you go to these people on the internet, that is the in. And then over time, it then becomes something very evil, very toxic. So 100%. Like, if you've got like impressionable young kids looking for that guidance, like either be that voice or at the very least warn them that a lot of these content creators, like they don't have their backs, like they're not really there to support them. They're there to like, I don't know.
To monetize them. I think actually they said that in Andrew Tate's like course, most of the users are like schoolboy age.
And this basically. Is again like, honestly, this just breaks my heart. Like I have friends with young sons, and like the fact that they go onto these platforms, and it starts with something little fun and like a little innocent, and then suddenly they're being like turned into like future freaking rapists or whatever. Like, what the hell? Like, it's wild because when I was platforms crack down on this?
When I was of that age, when I was 13, 14, 15, I remember getting into like books about pickup artistry, and obviously it's very problematic now as an adult. Yeah, but the thing is, you got to realize when you're a kid, like you're lost. Especially if you don't have an older brother.
Yeah, my roommate had that book. I remember talking to him about it.
Yeah, like a lot of people are just like, you want to do well in this world. You want to make connections. You want to meet people. You want to date. You know what I'm saying? And if there's no one there giving you guidance, you're going to take what is the most popular thing out there. The game was a bestseller. Yeah. So I was like, oh, let me read this stuff. Actually, in hindsight, obviously, it was very problematic in terms of like, manipulating women or whatever. But at the same time, there was also an element where like, they were still talking about women as in they were worthy of your time and attention. Whereas a lot of the stuff now is kind of like red pill. And then if you go into like, there's the black pill as well, which is this idea that like women only want men who look a certain way. And if you don't look that way, just give up basically. Like, I think they have a thing where it's like hope, cope, rope, which basically means you're in three camps. You're either somebody who's hopeful of like, oh, I can meet somebody. Cope, where you're like, oh, like, you know what, they don't like me, but, you know, if I try a bit harder, and then rope, which is like, you know, ideation
Die.
about suicide, die, because you're not going to have a chance, basically, of me. So that there's these massive subcultures where it's like so dark, where like what I thought what I was doing was a bit dark, but now I'm like, actually, this is like really evil, like, and what people are really like psyching themselves into believing is so dangerous, like. And I know people who, sorry to make this about like feeling sorry for incels, but I know people who like died by suicide, friend of a friend, because they genuinely swallowed that rhetoric of like, I have no chance, I'm too short, I'm too this, I'm too that. So there's definitely different. And also, I think if someone is willing to die by suicide because of that sort of mindset, they have kind of internalized that violence, whereas there are other people who externalize that violence. So like, if you are, I'm not saying that everyone who dies by suicide is inherently violent, but I'm saying that if you take that worldview, there are some that choose to take that worldview and externalize that violence. And, you know, there was that guy who shot up a school because he was like, why don't women like me? I'm the greatest thing since sliced bread. How dare they? Do you get what I'm saying? So what people are being fed is so dangerous. And it's we haven't got a clue. We're just talking about surface level shit here. Of
course. I mean, there's like a real deficit of love and connection. And I think that also has to be called out, right? Because there's some kind of like loneliness and disconnection that drives people to seek a sense of belonging amongst these incredibly toxic communities and these incredibly toxic, you know, incel like views. And you know, I don't have that lived experience of being a man. I don't know what it's like, and especially to be a young man right now. And you know, I'm sure it's like really hard, but like I know for a fact it's very hard to be a woman and to be a young woman. And the fact that we've seen girls murdered and we've seen like young women dying by suicide because of like the toxic abuse they've experienced online shows that misogyny is alive and well, and it kills. Like it literally does kill. And it scares me that young men are buying into these stories that, you know, there's never been a harder time to be a man. Women are out for your money. Women are out for themselves. You know, women are the enemy. Women are the enemy. It's like the more we divide ourselves, like the worse off we become.
Yeah, 1000%.
And it's only when we actually seek out what we have in common. Anyone can feel lonely. You know, anyone can feel sad. Anyone can feel disconnected. Anyone can feel insecure. Like start from that. Like if anyone's out there trying to like fix those things in you, they're trying to like basically fix what inherently makes you human. They're liars. And I think we just need to like bring out some more vulnerability and allow people to like have more open conversations in public and not shame them. And there are a lot of people, let's face it, who are still subscribing to outdated gender stereotypes. Man up. Like that is not a helpful phrase to say when men are dying by suicide in record numbers. Like we also need to show up for men and young boys and not push them into outdated stereotypes.
I think the other issue that makes it difficult is that like sometimes when you talk about systemic reasons why things happen, people think of it as like you're excusing it. So if I'm talking about crime, I might say poverty is an indicator. But you're excusing the criminal. I'm like, no. So if I say that maybe some men now, younger men, are struggling because women are doing very well. So the role of a man is not as clear as it once was. In the sense that like you knew what your role was historically. So now that women are emancipated and liberated to pursue their destinies, their dreams, their careers, their aspirations, a lot of times, sometimes, especially under the age of 30, they're doing better than the young men. So the young men's like, so what's my role? So that when I say that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm excusing their mindsets, their thoughts, their behaviors, or that we want to go back to the way things were. But I am saying that we now have a new world, which is what we wanted. But there are teething problems where there's a cohort of struggling young men who need to be shown a way. Now, you may say, I don't give a damn. Women are suffering for these reasons and still things are not perfect. But unfortunately, like, we cannot escape the consequences of leaving those men alone. And it's not an excuse for their behavior. It's not an excuse for their behavior. But just like poverty isn't a good thing and it makes people become criminals sometimes, it doesn't mean that we sit there and say we shouldn't alleviate poverty because they should know better. We should be like, okay, let's make society better for those people. But listen, some people are listening to this right now and probably getting infuriated by what I'm saying. Because it's like, but then does it ameliorate the problem? Is the answer to say shut up and man up, basically?
No, but I think the point here, you know, for me, I'm looking through the lens of gender stereotypes, and gender stereotypes can limit both men and women, right? Like if we assume that a woman's place is in the home or whatever, that is going to like limit her ambitions, and also, you know, whether that's her internally or the way people project those assumptions onto her. And the same kind of thing, if we expect a man to be a provider. Look, we're sitting here as like African immigrants. We know the rhetoric. We know the storyline. We know that we have very like traditional views in our cultures. And maybe that is what is expected of a man, to get a good job, look after his wife, look after his children, his family, or, you know, whatever it is. It's a very heteronormative culture as well. But I think ultimately, like, the point that I'm trying to make is that we look at things from a scarcity mindset. Like, we're looking at the world now in terms of like, oh, what have we lost by the progress of women? Maybe the question we should ask is, what have we gained? You know, we are gaining an opportunity for men to liberate themselves from the responsibility of having to be the breadwinner, the provider. And where's the content creator focusing on that storyline? Like, enter into a partnership with someone as close as equals as you can and operate as a team and build a future together. Like, your identity is not, and your value and your status is not determined by how much you earn or whether or not you can pay the bill and pay the check. And I think that's that argument around toxic masculinity, which again stems from patriarchy. Do you see what I'm saying?
I agree with you. I think where people might get infuriated with what I'm saying is that it might sound like I'm saying that the burden is on women to teach men how to not be in that way.
But what maybe there's responsibility on mums and dads
there needs to
raise sons.
There needs to be guys who hopefully are promoted by the algorithm, who are teaching the younger guys, yo, this is the healthy way to be. This is the way that you can have a partnership. It's a genuine partnership. You don't need to necessarily be the, you know, the alpha, blah, 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 right? And that's what we need to have promoted. There are a lot of content creators that are doing that work, but they're not necessarily promoted, like we said, compared to a Tate or Jordan Peterson. So I would get if someone heard what I'm saying and thinks, oh, like, women got enough on their plate. We need to worry about these, like, psycho guys.
Where's the rap song about a guy who's like, I let my wife pick up the bill.
No, but hold on.
Dishes after she cooks.
But my final point is also is that, like, the problem why these algorithms are so toxic as well is because I often see stuff around people who are often women talking about they want those gender norms. They want the man to pay the bill. If you ain't paying the bill, you're broke. If you know what I'm saying? So in rap music and popular culture, that is still the narrative. So it's not a foolish, they're not getting it from nowhere where they're like, I need to earn money, but somehow I'm struggling, basically, right? So they're not getting it from nowhere. It's a very complicated conversation, honestly. And I don't have the answers per se. We're not going to figure it out here.
No, definitely not. And of course, you're right to say that. Like, look at the trad wife movement. Like, it's inherently complex, but I do think that I feel genuinely that we all have a part to play in, like, the liberation of both men and women. Like, and that's like the point you're making. Like, like, I don't know. But
I think the last thing is, obviously, if you've got a little brother or a son, just make sure, just check out their phone. What are they watching?
Really
before you get surprised one day you're around a kitchen table and they're talking about some madness and you're like, what? So that's the small victory you can do. Like, just take an interest and be like, what are you actually watching?
Yeah.
Because I used to watch TV. My mom could see what I was watching if I was at home.
Exactly.
This is not that world anymore. This is a world where they could, you're thinking they're next to you, sweet little boy. They're in Narnia, bruv, watching some madness that you have no idea. So so speaking of age, on a completely separate point,
go.
I saw a clip from Keith Raboy, he's basically an acolyte of Peter Thiel, who's the founder of PayPal, Facebook investor. So Keith Raboy probably is also founder of Palantir. I always call him Evil Forrest Gump because he's basically involved in every single evil thing that's happened. He's also pro-Trump, been involved in the Trump campaign. So it's literally like if you made a movie of his life.
Is he also like a homophobic gay man?
I don't know if I would say that he's homophobic, but I would definitely say that he's probably anti a lot of the kind of LGBTQ push progressive movement. Yeah. So I don't know if he's against gay rights or gay marriage, but he probably might be against, more extenuating, additional rights that he might perceive them to be that way. But he and Keith Raboy is also gay, actually, surprisingly. They're like, they both fall into that camp of what I describe as, in politically they're conservative and they're kind of anti-gay, but at the same time they're both gay. But anyways, Keith Raboy came out. People are complicated. Yeah, that's the one thing about the show we should know by now. He came out and made a talk where he was like, Peter Thiel always told me, like, never to hire anybody over the age of 30 in a startup. I got confused there. And we'll play the clip now. But essentially, his argument was that as a startup, you have limited resources. You can't afford the superstar person that's going to work at Google. And usually somebody over the age of 30 is a known quality. You know what they're about. There's a consensus view on who and what they are. If you're a superstar, by then, OpenAI and Google's going to get you. Whereas somebody who's 21, 22 is a hidden gem potentially. They might have dropped out of university. You don't necessarily know what they're capable of doing. Yeah. So there's a potential where you can get an underpriced resource, which sounds very callous to talk about people that way. But at the same time, we talk about human capital when you hire people, because people they are I hate to say the word, but when you hire an employee, it's an investment in a person, and hopefully they can provide a return for you and your company, right? So I hate to talk about people say it in that capitalistic way, but it is, right? But obviously, listen, it's a very horrible thing to say. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
So
what if you're like over 30, just game over?
You're washed up, bruv. We're done, Abba. We're done. But then, do you think there's an element where that rationale makes sense? If you're a bootstrap founder with limited resources,
yeah.
Are you? But let's keep it real. If I've got limited resources, I can't afford a 35-year-old exec from Apple anyway. You know what I'm saying? I'm gonna have to go get a graduate and give them a chance. Like people gave that to me. I was hired as a graduate. You know, I was very cheap. You know what I'm saying? And now they probably can't afford to hire me. But like, what's your thoughts?
I mean, come on. Like, it depends, right? Like, if you're just looking for people to like get on the phone, cold call, pitch, power through, put in the numbers. Yeah, sure. Maybe you can assume that someone who's young, and this is a huge assumption, is going to be malleable, is going to be hungry, is going to like, you know, potentially like unlock opportunities that someone older like wouldn't have the energy or wouldn't have like the hunger for, or if they could, would be unaffordable to you. But I feel like there are so many assumptions being made in that. Like, there's also a period in time where you want someone who has experience and who has confidence to join your team and like bring that into the game. And yeah, I just think there's too many assumptions being made in that. You know, there are a lot of people that are young and not hungry. You know, there are a lot of people who are young and very average or below average. And similarly, there are people who are over 30 and who maybe didn't have a traditional route into education, or like something happened in their life and they took a career break. But, you know, you hire them 35, 40, whatever it is, and they are ready to go. Like, if anything, like, I feel a good analogy is people that return to education in their 30s. Yeah. A lot of people who return to education in their 30s get a lot more out of it than they did when they just went straight from formal state-required education into the higher education system. They didn't know who they were. Their prefrontal cortex hadn't even finished developing. That doesn't finish developing until you're like 25. They didn't have the conviction, the self-awareness, the purpose, the drive that they have in their 30s. So people who return to education in their 30s, 40s, get like so much more value out of it, tend to do a lot better out of it. So I feel like an argument could also be made that hiring the right person over 30s could unlock loads of potential and opportunity for your business. Yeah,
I mean, if you've got somebody who's like 34 and they're like, I just did a coding boot camp, I want to learn to code. I'm talking about if you've got a limited budget as a founder, that person might be a great hire. Exactly. Because they have experience, you know, they know how to work.
They know what they want.
They know what they want. And, you know, hiring a younger person, yeah, like you said, these are mass generalizations. Sometimes I've hired young people and, you know, they're not hungry, or, you know, there's so much basic training I have to give them that it actually isn't really worth my time. I would have been better off just getting somebody more experienced, right? So
these sort of stakes are higher as well when you're older, right? Like if you're 20-something, you might still be living at home. I mean, to be fair, you could also be 30-something still living at home, but you know what you want more and you put more value on your time. So if you are showing up, you're going to try to hopefully make the most of it.
And also, let's keep it real. Part of the reason why startups probably tend towards younger demographics is because a younger person doesn't necessarily know when they're being screwed. Like, one, you're more optimistic. You think equity is going to be
worth. So they're like easier to exploit.
Exactly. And it's just like you think, oh, yeah, I got 2% equity, bro. It's like most startup equity ends up being worthless. You don't. Maybe you don't have. Maybe you're more optimistic as a youngster, so you think, you know, whatever. Or maybe the hours are longer, so you know. Whereas most people, when they get to a certain age, they're like, bro, I need a bit of work-life balance here. I'm not getting screwed over by my employer. And you don't necessarily want that energy if you're a scrupulous founder, basically, right? So,
there's truth in that. I mean, look, I joined a startup when I was 23. I worked 12-hour days.
You got
I did not complain.
Exactly.
So finesse. Yeah. I did not complain. And I remember the day of the IPO because I looked forward to it so much. I was like, my student loans will disappear today. And I watched that graph drop over the first day of trading. And like, redoing the calculations every 2 hours, like, oh, okay, now I can pay this much off, now I can pay that much off. Literally, it was like initially predicted $30 a share, and I think we closed day one on like $15.
So basically, you're like, I can get a McDonald's at the end of that. That's all I can get now. I think we run out of time for this episode, so we'll move next topics to another episode. So thank you so much for listening to this episode of Techish. Obviously, it's been a slightly controversial episode talking about politics and young men and whatever, and then incel culture and stuff like that. So not lighthearted stuff. So appreciate you sticking by us and listening through, and we'll catch you next week at Techish Pod on our YouTube, at Techish Pod on Instagram. Peace. Lots of love. Bye.